Hello, everybody. Drasco here from 10knorm.com, where my main focus is to help guide heart-centered entrepreneurs under 10K months to transcend all of the blind spots that keep them from thinking, feeling, acting, and authentically marketing so they can normalize their own version of 10K months. And today's episode, we have another Real Talk segment where I bring in a heart-centered entrepreneur on their way towards their own 10K norm. And we have some real talk about what's currently their biggest challenge towards their 10K norm. And in that conversation, I'm going to explore who they are, why they do what they do, and then live on the call, I get to help them get out of their own way on a challenge that they're currently experiencing towards their 10K norm. And on today's call, we have Fallon Moran, who is a business mentor, office supply addict, and part creator of the C.O.D.E process. And Fallon actually started her coaching business in 2019. And ultimately, what she believes is that every entrepreneur deserves to have clear, structured systems integrated into their business so they can not just understand their notes, get organized, but also profit as a result. So Fallon, that is definitely something that a lot of business owners do, especially heart-centered ones, because we do tend to be all over the place. So thank you for coming on to the show. And how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. You know, it's a nice day outside. The sun's finally shining, so I'm enjoying it.
That is always a good thing. Definitely agreed. So I'd love to know more about what you do for your own words, because I kind of read the intro that was provided. So why don't you let myself and everybody else know, what the whole code system is about, what you do, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, so it actually started with rowing. It's a funny thing to hear that it started with a sport, but in 2019, I actually got started in coaching with crew and personal training because that's what I was doing at the time. I was a personal trainer. And over the course of 2019, things were going really, really well. I hadn't yet gotten into the online space, but in 2020, I decided to make the leap. And of course, there was a pandemic. So it was a little difficult to adjust, especially into the digital space with such a very niche sport. And so what happened was I got really frustrated. I was like grinding in the online space and I wasn't really enjoying it the same way that I was when I was doing it in person. So I took a really big step back and I had a coach point out to me when I was holding up my notebook on a Zoom one day, like, stop asking me questions about this topic. Like, can you just pay attention to your notebook right now? Like, your notes are gorgeous. Look at mine. And she showed me hers, and it was like notes everywhere, like just everywhere. It's just so disorganized and just disgusting. So I wound up going in that direction, which, if I really think back, it made complete sense. I was selling my notes and my study guides in high school and in college. So this really kind of made a lot of sense for me and my business at the time. So what I did was I spent like 3 months gathering a whole community of amazing women in entrepreneurship. And I started doing a lot of research and I asked them a lot of questions, but at the end of the day, I boiled it down to this process that I used, and that's my C.O.D.E process, where first I have to get really clear on what I'm doing and like having all of that completely aligned before I go and organize the market research and organize the questions that I'm going to ask. And then I start from there with all of that information to design what it's going to look like. In this particular case, I designed a notebook. And then it was the execution phase, which is the E in the code. And it was going out and getting the notebooks printed and then from there making sales. So that's how all of those things tie together.
That is pretty cool. And again, it reminds me of that Steve Jobs quote where he's like, you can't connect the dots looking forwards. You can only connect them looking backwards because
Mhm.
it's like, how do you go from personal training to, selling a notebook? And just for context, both for yourself and any like new listeners. So I actually owned a brick and mortar weight loss center for 10 years. So personal training was, my bread and butter for a long time. And one of my coaches was actually a rower as well. So it was just like, it's pretty cool to see that even in this context. And very much my own journey is extremely similar in that like it doesn't make sense when
Yeah.
look at it in the moment, but then it comes back. And to be fair, I think it's actually a more common occurrence amongst many entrepreneurs that just doesn't make sense until you're actually living it. So what I'm curious then, with regards to what you're doing right now. So one of the things that's kind of notoriously present with not just heart-centered entrepreneurs, but all entrepreneurs in general is like, we have 50 million thousand like tabs open, notes everywhere. Like I have way more notebooks than like I actually know what to do with. Like I'm constantly taking notes. I'm constantly writing stuff. It's just been a thing of mine forever.
Mhm.
How do you address something that's as common as that, but happens all the time?
Yeah, so our brain really likes to work in categories. So it's okay to have a certain amount of notebooks, but when it starts to get like everywhere, then that's when it starts to become overwhelming. Our psychology is also really wired to pay attention to everything that you leave out in a space. So if you have like 17 notebooks all over your desk, your brain gets split 17 different ways, not including your laptop, your mouse, or anything else on, the desk. So you get really overwhelmed really quick. But in terms of having those written notes everywhere, what I have found to be a really good system is to put a table of contents in the beginning of my notebook. And then that way I have like a running tab, more or less, of what my notes are in all of the pages. And they could be different, that's fine. But at least I know going back to the table of contents, like after having notated that, okay, if I need to go look at business stuff, it's on page 5. But if I need to go look at like, let's just say podcast stuff, it might be on page 17. It's really important to like make a really good system with that table of contents and stick with it. Another thing that I really like to promote is for people who don't like to necessarily go back and forth to have those little tiny post-its, like these little itty bitty ones, and then leave them hanging off the side of your notebook so that you can easily like flip through and you can find everything that you need. I would recommend having no more than like a couple of notebooks around because then it would be too much for you. But what I've noticed is that when you have a page and you have specific structure on that page and you give people like boxes of where they need to put things, it becomes a lot more efficient for them. I was on a call earlier with a client and she was like, I really love my Ninja notebook because I can streamline and condense my notes like I could never do before. Because when you have no idea what actions you have to take, you just keep writing, writing, writing. It's like you almost get lost because your brain's like, okay, how do I have to reword this? Keep it in a box, keep it right next to your little, like I have check boxes, and then just make it very simple, very easy, actionable, bulleted items.
That actually makes a whole lot of sense, and it resonates in, I think, for me, even beyond just the actual like notebooks or keeping notes or whatever, keeping on task. Like one of the first things you said was like, I have 17 notebooks. It's like my brain has this open loops that it's
Mhm.
trying to solve, and it just drives you crazy. And the reason I mention that is, a lot of my clients that I work with, overwhelm tends to be a common thing that they, will have gripes about. Like, I'm overwhelmed at all of the marketing stuff that I could potentially do. I'm overwhelmed at all of the options that are out there. I'm overwhelmed at all of the information. And, what I always tell them is like, overwhelm is less about what you're getting done. It's more about what you're not getting done, right?
Mhm.
That constant focus, that constant open loop in your brain is just creating stress because it's like, where are you looking? Are you looking at the things you're not getting done? Or are you focused on getting the one thing in front of you that, you can actually get done? You can actually build momentum forward. So to me, when you mentioned that piece with the notebooks, it kind of sounded the same way. Like I have the notebooks that I need as opposed to all of them. Like, how do I reconcile that? Like, would that be accurate?
Yeah, very accurate. Like the exact same.
Awesome. Yeah, that's it. Like when you know one thing and then it just like you start to see it everywhere. But I think it's a very good thing with regards to like notebooks and things like that. The other question that I had while you were speaking was, so oftentimes, again, so I work with heart-centered entrepreneurs, so a lot of different like wellness professionals, healers, intuitives, coaches, and they'll often be much more resonant to like, okay, I want to be in a flow state. I don't like to be tied down with structure. I don't like this feeling that, I have to have checklists and I have to do it this way. And my schedule is all, like organized. I want to have that ability to flow because that's what lights me up. So I understand that that is a need, but sometimes there's also a need for the structure in that. And I'm just curious, how do you handle that when it comes up?
That is something that, truth be told, I still have to work with. It's a lot of making sure that I take the time to tune in and do my routines and pay attention to my energy, because if I don't get myself in the right space, it doesn't matter how many things are on the checklist. If I don't have the energy to show up and do that thing, then it's like no matter how much structure I give myself, it's never going to get done. So it's really important for me, particularly, to go through my morning journaling routine, to go through a meditation, which, truth be told, I haven't done in a while. And I know my oracle cards are telling me to. So, like, it's important to do those things. I've been doing the journaling every single day. It is definitely helping. But even just taking extra time to just sit in finding that energy for yourself is really the most important thing, because you're going to know when you're in that alignment. Okay, I can totally do that one thing on the checklist. Like, I'm not saying create like 28 things on a list, but create 3 good things maybe out of that 28 that you can accomplish with really good energy when you're working.
Absolutely. And again, like the resonance, even like in exactly what you do, and a lot of the principles that like 10K Norm and the program is based on, it's actually pretty cool to see how they align. Because what was coming up for me when you were sharing that was like it's not necessarily about choosing one or the other. Like it's not a black and white decision. It is actually the balance on the spectrum of those two things, right? So what you described, I often call like you need routine and structure to ensure that you have the space to nurture that flow, right?
Hmm.
So taking the time in the morning to center, taking the time to meditate what I needed, checking in and pausing so that I can see where do I have enough energy to do things and do I need to modify what was initially on the structure. Like those are nurturing things, right? If I know nature is something that pumps me up, okay, so I have to create some structure to be able to get to the nature that I need to do, set boundaries in place to not have other things or other demands come into play. But if that lights me up, then I need to structure, time for play and time for flow, right? But if I'm solely reliant on that, then it's like like a river that's flowing. It only flows because you have structure to make it flow. Otherwise, it becomes a lake and it just kind of like sits there, right?
Hmm.
So, how does that land for you? Like, is that reflective of what you find? Um,
Yeah, I think it's always been a very normal thing for me to have some routine. Being a rower myself, like we need to have a routine because we have to be out on the water so that we can catch really good water. But I can totally see the nature versus nurture thing. And I was even just thinking in terms of, 10K, right? In terms of money, like that whole journey, even into probably past 10K too, it's a very nature versus nurture type of thing. And while yes, if you want to get to the natural abundance, you have to nurture yourself into that abundance. Like there's a lot of guidance to get there, and that's in the form of, for most people, routines and a little bit of structure.
yeah, 100%. And the way that I always like to describe it, like, so especially, I think you're exactly spot on. Like the path to 10K very much can be achieved, as a solo practitioner. I think beyond is where you need considerations for, teams and outsourcing, and that's its own beast. But there, like you can't go past that without having that structure. So I always would always reflect that back as like it is the structure
Mhm.
that like creates the container for that flow, for that nurture, for that abundance to actually come in. and then take form, right? Like water takes the form of whatever container you put it in. You need that container. It has to go somewhere. And as much as, yeah, we want to receive and, we want to kind of have this element where the things that we want come to us, like it's almost like they have to latch on to something. So we need that structure to balance out the flow until you create something that is its own thing, right? Like our body can do its own thing if we get out of the way, but our business, like art, has to be created. So we got to get the pieces in play to create it. Then we can kind of have these other considerations. So yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And like you said, it's very cool to see it, how it shows up in like the micro, if you're, organizing your day-to-day, notebooks, and then kind of in the macro this way. So as a segue in that case, I'd really like to know then what brings you to this call today to kind of explore, what's in the way of your 10K, Norm.
Finding the block. I am like very, very close. I'm very, very close, but every single time it's like always something. And I don't know if it's, like a me thing, or if it's like an other people thing, or if it's like a strategy thing. So there were just so many different things that came up. And when I saw, 10K Norm podcast and what you guys go through, I was like, maybe this will be the day that I figure it all out.
All right. Well, let me see what we can do in one day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, okay. So there's a few things that you mentioned there, right? Is it me? Is it other people? Is it like something else? Is it a block? It could be all of those things and none of those things. So let's get a little bit more specific. Like when you look at kind of what's going on right now, how would you break down those elements?
Everywhere. They are everywhere. I am personally going through a lot, and other people around me are also going through a lot. And it almost kind of makes me think that everybody always says to build your business around your life, not your life around your business. And this definitely feels like one of those things that I'm trying to build. It's kind of like a catch 22, I'm trying to build a business so that I could generate the income so that I could do the things that I want to do for my life. So that's kind of where I find myself like, well, I want to do this thing with my life, but I'm in this much debt. So I have to focus on doing this thing with my business, but I can't do this thing with my business until this thing with my life is figured out. So like, I'm kind of trying to understand where do I go first?
Got it. So it's kind of that limbo stage of like, it's a chicken or the egg problem, right? Like,
Oh
do
yeah.
I get out of debt first, then live my life, or do I focus on living my life and then the debt will kind of, piggyback its way onto that? Like, would that be accurate?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's always kind of like, okay, of course you get, the payment notifications every month. Like, okay, how am I going to cover this? And then you get enough to cover it, but then it's like, okay, but it's not enough to pay it down. So like, it's the chicken and the egg. It's literally exactly what you just said. So that's kind of where I find everything. And then at the same time, it's really difficult. I mean, we were in a house before we got into this apartment, and then because of what happened with the pandemic, we got, we downsized. We had to downsize. So it wasn't like I could say, oh yeah, I can go live the life that I can live, but it's, just because of the circumstances and the situation. So that's really where I find myself like, okay, well, which do I do first? And naturally I go to the nature, because when you go to the business, like that's what's generating you the money. And that's what's going to sustain you so that you could do the nurturing, right? But I guess I maybe just figured it out for myself that I have to do it the other way around.
Okay, cool. So break that down a little bit for me. Like, what was the realization when you vocalized that?
That it's not dependent on numbers per se, because it's almost like if I go out and I do the things that just make me so ecstatic, anyways, it's gonna work. I did it with the notebook. I did it with my code process. I did it with so many other different things, but it's like that constant, it's like a big constant like stop sign when, you know, the numbers come in. And it's like in this particular case, obviously I'm referencing the apartment, right? Like that's something that's locational. So like, is it moving to a different location that isn't going to put as much pressure on me to pay for rent? Living outside of New York City, it's not like it's, you know, it's not cheap over here. So it definitely is a pretty penny. And that's why it's hard for me to do the nurture things if I also have to do the nature things at the same time. So it's kind of what came up.
Got it. And how would you define the nurture and the nature aspect as it relates to your business?
I think the nurture is doing the things like innovating. I really love creating. I love creating what my notebook is. I'm thinking of doing a planner at this point because that's kind of what my audience has been getting at recently. I'm really excited to do more with the code process and create a bigger container with that. And the nature, I think, would be like money. Like I always think about money as a natural thing because it's what you have for sustenance, much like we eat food, right? Food is natural, food is abundant in certain places of the world. It's the same idea with money. So like in my business, I definitely look at money as the nature, and then the things like my notebook or the things like my code process, or I just even started a reel deal because I love reels so much. Like I can literally talk about reels for days. Um, like those are the nurture things.
Got it. So the nurture is more about the things that you're creating.
Mhm.
The nature is kind of the things that give you oxygen to keep creating.
Yes.
Okay. And right now it's like I'm lacking in the nature, in this sense, like I'm lacking in the options that money would provide so that I can do a lot of the nature things or nurture things like create, etc. Is
Oh
that
yeah.
accurate?
Yes. 100%.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it. So there's also some circumstantial aspects to this. So I have to like downsize, and then how do I like work within that? What goes first? What goes second? So there's like circumstantial aspects to it there. Is
Oh
that
yeah.
accurate as well?
1,000,000%.
Okay, got it. So in that case, like what I have just written down here is right now. So we got like the circumstances. There's personally like there's a lot of stuff going on, which I think is part of the circumstantial bit. Like I'm downsizing, etc. I guess that affects others as well, right? Because you kind of briefly mentioned like that piece, and a lot of these pieces are keeping me from doing the actual things that I want. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah.
Okay, got it. So when you then look at all of the circumstances, right? You look at all the things you've kind of had to go through, it's a big transition, etc. What I'm hearing is there's this element of not necessarily powerlessness, but the overall narrative is because of X circumstantial thing, I can't Y thing that I want to do.
Mhm.
So is that like, does that resonate in any way?
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
So
Hmm.
do you think that narrative will help you get to where you want to go?
No. No,
Okay.
I don't.
Why not?
Well, because when I hear it, it's like I can't, it's a cause and effect statement, right? But when I continue to say I can't do this because I don't have that, then I'll never get that because I'm constantly going to be stuck doing this.
Correct. Right. So very good self-awareness, right? Like my narratives aren't actually rooted in my business. They're rooted in God's business, pandemic, etc., and then other people's business, right? Whatever the dynamic is there, it's like I don't actually control other people. I don't actually control circumstances. What I do control is my own contribution to all of those. But the longer and the more time I spend in other people's and God's business, the less time, energy, and focus I'm spending in my own. And every single dollar that you've made it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the piece that takes away from you making more dollars. Does that part resonate?
I'm a little, I have to think about it for a second because I can see what you mean, but I'm like, for whatever reason, I just thought about how money isn't real.
Okay.
Like what you said just literally popped into my head. Money isn't real because it's not real. Like we could look at the stock market and we see the graph of the indexes, and there is no gold standard anymore. So we know that it's not real, right? But what is real? And the thing that is real is the people that we serve, because what they see is value. And then we correlate value to a dollar sign, right? So that's kind of what came up when you said that. I don't know if that's going in the right direction, but that's what my brain just thought.
Yeah, I mean that's what came up. That's what came up. So I guess before I give my reflection back, how does that make you feel?
Uh, it makes me feel small. It makes me feel really small. I have like I have totally have a limiting belief, and acknowledging on reversing it, that because of my age, I am not valuable.
Got it. So there's this element of because of my age,
Hmm.
which again is a circumstance, like you don't choose
Hmm.
your age, you are the age that you are.
Yeah.
There is, I'm rooted in a narrative that makes me feel small. Money isn't even real. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just now making the connection, but money isn't real. It's the value that I provide to people. I can't provide a lot of value because of my age and why I'm small. So in some ways, kind of like the value I provide isn't real. So would that be accurate or no?
Oh my God. You literally just brought up my price list for all of my products in my head. Like very accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so there's definitely a lot of those like I think the narrative piece is extremely real for you, right?
Hmm.
You mentioned your price list as well. So what came up with that?
It was literally like the listing of all of my products and the price points. I have like an 8-week group program that is not priced the same as most people who are in my community. Their 8-week group program, it would probably be 10%. Like it's 90% less than what they charge. Um, and even just like my Ninja notebook, I started, it's 9.5 by 11. It was $10 a journal for me to get it printed, and I only charged 15. So I didn't really make quite a big margin on it when I first ran it. So I look when you said that, it was literally like, okay, this was small. I'm pricing my group programs small. Like I priced myself small because of that.
Yeah. So basically, your pricing and the subsequent nature you take in is 100% proportional to the narratives you have about yourself and
Mhm.
essentially your contribution.
Well, I don't feel like my contribution is small. I feel like when I go into my group program and I coach and I put all of this thought, and really I'm thorough with the Ninja notebook and how it's designed, I really feel like I am putting a lot into it. I feel like I'm giving them so much value. So I don't feel like my contribution is small, but I feel like I'm small.
And that's a great distinction because, yeah, like I'm actually confident in my ability to do the thing,
Hmm.
but my narrative of even going out there to do the thing, pitching it, asking for what it's actually valued is way, way lower,
Yeah.
right? So I guess the more accurate bit would be your contribution, or let's just say your intake financially, is 100% correlated with your perception of self.
Oh my gosh. Just like completely opened the book to page like whatever. Yeah.
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 And I know it's not like the nicest thing to hear, and I don't mean to say it in like a, hey, like, well, look at this. It's just I'm reflecting back, and sometimes that shock is necessary to be like results don't lie. So the results, if we trace back, generally tend to trace back to some sort of narrative or thought,
Mhm.
because it's that narrative that got you to do or to feel a certain way. That feeling inspired all of the actions that, like you felt a certain way. So that's why you charge $15 instead of 30 for this thing, right?
Mhm.
That got you the result that you have. And, I'm guessing that also is what is reflected in your other price points and other offerings. So does that part resonate?
Oh yeah, it resonates entirely. And it's funny, like I had a client call me at 2 p.m. yesterday and she told me that she had a client, she just got a client, she secured a client for $4,975. And I just kind of like sat there and like, yeah, I was so happy for her. Like I helped her get there. But I was like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Like, why am I charging like so low? The people that I am helping are making 5 grand. Like, what am I like? Who am I? Like that's kind of, and you're not wrong. If anything, it's like the biggest eye opener to create change in that thought because I can do it. I did it, you know, but I don't know why I keep putting myself in this loop like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's now coming up, in many different, like the universe in many ways, through me, through the clients, through like, your own exploration. It's reflecting back the same thing. One big aspect of where you're at right now is the narratives that you hold, which are then going to affect the kind of technical business aspects of what's in front of you. So, how do I actually package? How do I price? What's the messaging? Is my sales process going to be different if I'm charging 5K versus, $500 or whatever it is that you charge, right? That's the technical elements that need to be in play. So that is the, part of that nature nurturing, but they're never going to have crystallization until the narrative pieces and the subsequent emotional pieces actually come through, right? So before I go on, does that piece make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. My one question here would be for the emotional piece that you were just talking about. Like I know that being in this point of debt that I put in for my company and for my business is what is making me emotional. So what what would be the best place for me to go instead of continuing to be trapped in this catch 22 that I keep finding myself in?
So great question. I would need some clarifications on that piece. So you said, okay, I have this debt that I used to start the business.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of looming over me, and
Mm-hmm.
the emotions of that looming debt are keeping me from moving forward. Is that
Yes.
accurate or no? Okay,
Yes.
it is.
Yes.
Okay. What are the emotions that are at play?
Oh my God. Like constant pressure, worry, anxiety. Um, it's some days it's just absolute rage and frustration and anger, like all low vibration emotions, anything to do at the bottom of the spectrum, shame, guilt that I even spent that money in the first place. Um, I don't know why I would feel guilty. I wanted to create a business, but I feel like I'm guilty of putting myself in this financial position. And literally every low vibrational emotion that you could possibly think of.
Yeah, that's usually how these things go. So And number one, I appreciate you being that candid about it, because the reality is we've all been there, and that is the shit, that we tend to live in, behind the Instagram posts,
Yep.
right? So
Oh yeah.
it is definitely very real. So I appreciate you sharing it, because it does come up often. Um, so when you collectively think all of those emotions, how do you react as far as like your actions or, states, or whatever the case might be?
It's almost like I just want to let go. Like I don't even, I'll either completely let go or I'll drive myself into the ground doing something. It's
Got it.
not even enjoyable. It's like I will just completely like like unplug or just
So it's like I either flee from the
Mhm.
emotion, so like I go on a Netflix binge watching, thing.
Doctor Who, yeah.
Yeah, that's totally fine, right? Whatever works, like that's what works, right?
Yeah.
So I either completely flee and distract myself to oblivion, so I don't have to feel those things, or I essentially achieve the exact same thing by just working to the point of exhaustion. So then all I feel like is exhaustion, which I prefer to the misery of, worry and anxiety and rage, etc. Like, would that be accurate?
It's funny that you literally say those exact words because I was like, maybe I just like putting myself in misery. Those were the exact thoughts to myself yesterday. I was on a walk to the post office to deliver an order that came in. I was like, maybe I just like being miserable. Like that is so funny that you just said that.
Well, I would say you don't necessarily like being miserable, but you've repeated misery so often that you're comfortable in it.
Wow. Drop the mic.
So how does that land when I reflect that back to
Yeah, it's very true. It goes back way, way further than entrepreneurship. It goes back to like constantly putting pressure on myself to get like straight A's or constantly putting pressure on myself to be the best athlete or whatever the case was. Like it was always, you're going to be miserable until you get the big thing.
you? Right. And subsequently, I'll be worthy when I get the big thing, because that worth will negate the misery. So it's only the getting of the external thing that will ensure I don't feel like crap or I don't feel miserable. But until then, I'm miserable. Is that
Yeah.
so accurate?
Yeah. Yep. And it's all of it's ironic. It's almost like a contradiction because I know that you have to be happy for you to get the thing that you want. I read Sean Akers' book, The Happiness Advantage, and he outlines that success is not the path to happiness. Happiness is the path to success. So like I know it, but I just don't, for whatever reason, there's something going on all up in this noggin in here that isn't getting it.
Yeah. And I would say the part that we oftentimes miss, and again, that comes up often in my client work, is that there's emotional logic and then there's like cognitive logic.
Mhm.
None of these things make cognitive sense. Like we can all seem like, whoa, this is ridiculous. Like, why am I making myself miserable?
Mhm.
The problem is we're trying to address these things on a level where they don't exist. They exist on an emotional level, right? And in emotional logic, all of these things make sense. Our skill sets, especially for individuals who, are cognitively smart, like you organize things for a living, you've gotten straight A's, you know how to push, you know how to be willful. In that arena, those are great tools. And our biggest strengths oftentimes become our first distortions. So when you try to outthink your emotions, it never works because you're playing a wrong game, right? So, guys, you're nodding your head. So, what's resonating with you there?
Uh, I don't know how into astrology you are, but I like when you said that, I was like, oh my God, I'm such a Virgo. Like I am a Virgo. And when you say that, I was like, oh my God, I'm such a Virgo because it's when you said it, I visualized like two different brains. And I know that this brain, it works perfectly fine. But it's so funny how it's the first thing in the other brain to just completely be a train wreck. So I'm like, I see how they're connected. I understand the logic, obviously, such a Virgo, but it's like, okay, well, now I'm like, okay, well, what about the emotion? How do we work on that?
100%. And, I can even just see exactly what you're talking about reflected back, because it's like, I explained to you kind of the inner workings of what's involved. You're like, yep, I get it. This is how it is. Okay, now how do I like solve it? Right. So it's like you just kind of prove your own point with regards to this is exactly where I'm good at, so exactly where I'm comfortable at. So it is a man with the nail or man with the hammer problem, right? Like to the man with the hammer, everything becomes a nail. So as long as we try to outthink our emotions, it's never actually going to work.
Mhm.
So the first part, and I mean, how to get into specifics is a much, different conversation, outside the context of this particular like episode or whatever, but just in a generality, the first part of it is unless you can manage and tolerate the emotions that are coming up, i.e., do you get into these doom loops where the emotions take you? Any of this, like the solutions aren't actually going to help, because that is actually the first step. Can you fight the urges to go down into that hole in oblivion when the emotions hit? Do you have that reliable skill set? Then we can begin to actually work them. So again, I see you nodding. So what the
I'm laughing because you call it a doom loop, and I really just I think it's such a funny way to describe it. No, I don't know that I'm properly equipped to get myself even like I always end up going down the doom loop. I like there's very few points that I can ever remember that I stop myself going into the doom loop. It's usually it's usually like I'll go right into the doom loop. If I don't have somebody around me to distract me who is like much higher in energy at that point in time than I am, that's it. I'm done. And then I'll be stuck there. And this is like I want to say this has been happening since the beginning of July recently, and it's like I'm stuck there. And I can't when I'm stuck there, it's like okay, I have to like that's when I have to escape and I have to unplug because I'm clearly driving myself into the ground for 6 weeks straight and I'm not getting anywhere. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go on vacation. And I have a vacation planned for Florida in the next couple of weeks. So that's kind of that's it was just I thought that that was funny because that's literally exactly what happens.
and what stood out for me when you spoke that whole thing is I agree with you that is what that pattern looks like when it manifests like in front of us. So 100% you're on point there. One of the things that you said is like, okay, I resonate with the doom loops because I always find myself falling into them unless I have somebody who is higher energy to distract me.
Mm-hmm.
And what we just spoke about, a few minutes ago was how do I deal with all of the emotions? I either let go or drive myself to exhaustion, i.e., I find ways to self-distract or rely on another to distract. So the first thing I would say in your instance is your default coping strategy with any of these emotions is I find a way to flee. With the other, with the external, or with myself, I will find a way to not look at that piece. So your emotional management is going to come from learning a skill set that is reliable, meaning I can point evidence to me not falling into these holes, not falling into these doom loops, essentially not distracting myself to the point where I start to see consequences of them. So again, before I continue, does that part make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. And then the other part that I would just want to drive home is, we started this whole conversation with looking at like the limiting beliefs and like the narratives that you yourself saw as like, oh my God, yeah, I could totally see how these thoughts and narratives reflect in my pricing, and it's just this like big loop. And then we got into the emotion. So what do you think creates those emotions?
Me. I create that in myself because I constantly put myself under pressure to reach a certain point, just like in athletics or in school or in
Okay,
whatever.
so pause right there. Like it's me, my own pressure, and what creates those?
The pressure,
Yeah.
external circumstances.
Okay. So do you control external circumstances?
No,
And when you're looking at external circumstances, are you in your business, other people's business, or God's business?
I am in God's business and I have no control over, or other people's business. That one too. I have no control over those things.
Right. So the question was, who is the source or the cause of those emotions? Eventually, we got to, well, partly circumstances. Oh, but wait, circumstances are God's business. So again, I'm circumventing my contribution to those. We got there by looking at pressure. So again, who or what creates those pressures?
Me.
And which part of you specifically?
The doom loop part of me. I don't know what it's like it's a black thing down all the way at the bottom of the thing, you know?
Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge it does oftentimes feel that way, right? Like if I didn't have these doom loops and these emotions that just take me over, I wouldn't actually experience this pressure. What I'm kind of, probing at and not pushing to, but just trying to illuminate is all of those emotions that you feel, there's an unexamined narrative behind them, right? So it is the thoughts I think that create, like, I think pressure thoughts, they're going to create pressure feelings, which are going to create pressure actions. And I don't know what they are specifically, but just from like listening to you talk, I can take a guess that they're going to be like, bills are coming up. I need to get some shit done, go and get to work, keep working because I still don't have the result I'm looking for. Yeah, that would be accurate.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So the thought that started that whole loop was a pressure thought, which is going to lead to a pressure feeling, which will lead to a pressure action, which will lead to a pressured result, which may or may not be what you want, but it will lead to a pressured result. So one element, we identified is, okay, so I have these narratives that are limiting me. They're pressing the brakes. You have the doom loop side, which is I'm trying to also press the gas while simultaneously pressing the brakes. And your instance, that's a two-pronged bit. One is I don't know how to manage my emotions to not get into those doom loops. And then the subsequent bit after that is I also don't know how to manage my thought and narratives to not perpetuate those loops, right? And then the last part of this is then the actual mechanics of, okay, so how do I like price myself accordingly, sell it, package it? What's the messaging supposed to be like? How do I find the clients that can afford the higher rates? All of that stuff, oftentimes people go down the road of trying to fix, but without actually addressing the part underneath the surface. So like um, oh my God, the ice. I'm having a brain fart.
Yeah, for glacier, yeah.
Yeah, the glacier, right? So it's like that 2/3 of the emotional management and the thought management is the part that's below the surface that no matter how perfectly you get the marketing piece is never actually going to move you forward. So does all of that make sense?
Oh yeah. And I literally, as soon as you said it, I was like, oh my God. I should just, as soon as the thought comes, I should just like do something when the thought comes that's not work. That's when I have to like, I don't want to say separate. It's almost like I think of like tweezers and like picking that particular thought out of my head so that I can keep myself in the emotionally good place. It's almost like The Good Place, like the TV show. That's what it reminds me of. But that was what I saw when you were describing that. I was like, oh my gosh, if I could just like pick out the thought, that would be so easy.
It can be, from my experience, both personally and with clients. It takes, like you got to develop a craft and a skill set. So like taking the athletic bit of it, right? Like you don't have the technique to be efficient there, right? Eventually it looks like that. Just like if I watch rowing on TV, I'm like, oh yeah, it's simple. Like you just kind of like pull the thing, right? But like there's so many nuances that go into it, from like how you use your legs, like the position of your arms, like how it hits the water, like I'm just guessing here because I haven't really done a lot of rowing,
Mhm.
but it's like the same thing for these pieces. Like, yeah, it looks like I just need to pick the thought. But again, which part of your brain is that? It is the understanding intellectual part that understands things quickly. It's trying to outthink its way out of emotional problems. So you're right, it does eventually look like that, but the path to get there is going to be a combination of practicing skills that you haven't practiced yet, being uncomfortable to face a lot of these emotions, and subsequently, getting the reliable skill set to have and create these new thoughts. And then the feedback loops required to refine that while you then go forward and actually execute on the new marketing. So again, how does that piece land for you?
It 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 makes complete sense, and it almost makes me feel like my emotional life is a complete train wreck.
I mean, it usually is when you get honest with all of us. So, I'm saying that not to make you feel bad, but at the end of the day, that is the part that trips
I
more people than not.
I completely, like, I laugh about it because it's like an eye opener, like, until it's a very objective conversation. It's not like it's a sub, like there's nobody talking about any particular thing about how this is worth anything. It's a very objective conversation, which I very much appreciate. And it's just like, oh my God, all of these things are real and they're true. And it's like, oh my gosh, I never would have looked at my life that way, but it's not wrong. Just
Yeah,
did.
and that is the value of clarity and awareness. So just to kind of now shift gears a little bit and just kind of move you into more of a kind of zoomed out lens here, is if you cumulatively looked at everything that we just talked about, how is this affecting you day to day?
Oh, it affects me every day. It affects me every day. And it's really a doom loop for sure at certain points and others. Like you mentioned, when it's those pressuring thoughts, like, okay, the bills are due, or like, okay, I have to get this ready for rent, or okay, the insurance is due on the car. And then it's like, okay, well, what do I do to get it? Like that's the next thing. And then as soon, it's just like you said, it's the thought that leads to the belief, which leads to the behavior, which leads to the action, which leads to the reality. Like it's all connected. So it's more a question of how I can start. I can hear the thoughts, I can see them like going back in time. It's more a question of, like you said, like how can I start to implement strategies to prevent me from going down the rest of the domino chain, and to reverse that thought to keep me in a good spot.
I agree with you. That is going to be the crux
Mm-hmm.
of your transformation, in addition to combining that when it goes live with all of the kind of business and marketing mechanics you have to change, right? So one is I day to day exist with these things in place. And then the other one is, well, when I go live with all the changes I'm going to make, I'm going to be asked to up level. It's going to trigger all of these seeming doom loops. That's when I have to have again, either the support or the know-how of how to deal with it when it does come up, because these things never disappear. What happens is you just get better at dealing with them. But the doubt, the emotions, the limiting thoughts, they happen at every single level all the time. But it's just, are the results showing that you're moving forward and moving beyond them and transcending them, or are you in that loop of just repeating the same, right? That really is the question. So what I would then throw back your way is like, how much longer are you willing to allow yourself to stay where you're at?
I no. No, I'm not willing to let myself stay this long. I feel like it's been long already. I'm definitely ready to get out of the loop. It's funny when you explain that, it's a loop until you learn to transcend that one thing, and it's all the same, but it comes at different levels. It was like that in 2020. Like I was stuck in a loop for the longest time, like 9 months I was stuck in that loop. I was like, oh my God, this is awful. But then I got out of it because I had to recognize what the patterns were. I recognized the patterns. And even talking to you, I'm like, okay, I see the pattern. I just said that I can think the thoughts that I was thinking about just recently. But now it's like, okay, I have, this going with the notebooks and I have this going with the code, but I'm letting myself stay in this same pattern loop. And it's like you said, it's just a different way of handling it. So now, like the first thing that came up was, gotta be better with boundaries, Fallon. That's what it is. As soon as the thought comes up, you gotta set a boundary.
Correct. Yeah. So it's going to be boundaries is always one of the things that comes up. I think in your instance, there's going to be a lot of ones with like worthiness and smallness and narratives around my age and what I can offer, being comfortable to actually charge what I'm worth. Rather mention the emotional management of not getting into those doom loops and then the subsequent refinement of choosing a new thought. Cumulatively, kind of that's what you're looking at, broad strokes bit. So just to kind of cap this off, then, does that feel complete for you? Is there still something that's outstanding?
Oh yeah, no, that feels very complete for me. And like I'm at this point where I'm like, oh my God, my brain feels like it just exploded all over the computer screen.
All right, well, mission accomplished in that case. So it felt good on my end too. So awesome. All right, then to just kind of cap it off, floor is yours. Let all the people know, what you do, how they can get in contact with you, who's the best person to get in contact with you. Floor is yours for all that good stuff.
Yeah, I am definitely the best person to get in contact with. You can definitely find me on Instagram. I'm at Fallon K. Moran. I'm on TikTok. It's my first name and my middle name on TikTok, at Fallon Carey with a K. And I'm on YouTube as well. So that's where you can find me a little bit more about what I do. I really focus on a lot of helping you entrepreneurs get from super disorganized to crystal clear with my code process. And this has definitely been a life-changing day. And I just want that to be duly noted because I was like, I'm going to come on to this podcast to see what it is. And let me tell you, I figured out what it is.
Well, I think that's the best praise I've gotten so far on an episode. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And yeah, thank you for being on, because this is the real talk of what it takes to make these shifts. And, I know we often talk about like, we're not alone in our problems. We're not alone in our problems. Like it feels extremely real and isolating, but it is very, very much common. It is very much solvable. This is the work that I do, and I'm happy to provide for others, and to see that shift even in just these short, hour long whatever episodes is fulfilling for me as well. So thank you for volunteering to co-create it, because it's not as fun if I just do it by myself. So
Yeah, absolutely. Very illuminating for sure. For sure. For sure. So
awesome.
thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So yeah, we will put all of your stuff then in the show notes. And yeah, for everybody else, I will see you guys on the next one.